Hi.
Hello, Annick.
Hi, Ciara. So nice to have you with me today. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Let me introduce you to the people who are listening. So this is Dr. Ciara McEnteggart, and across the 10 years of her career in both Ireland and Belgium, Dr. McEnteggart has built up a strong reputation in her field as both a scientist and a clinician. She has published over 40 scientific articles and books, chapters, and given over 70 presentations and workshops internationally. She was, up until recently, a senior researcher at Ghent University before establishing Perspectives Ireland. She is highly established as a behavioral scientist and co-developed process-based behavior therapy.
Thank you for that introduction, Annick.
Yes, well, for me, it's really special to have you talking about this because I was saying to some colleagues of mine today that I had the luck over the last 10 years to see psychology or psychotherapy develop in a way that we know more and more how to treat people effectively. And then there is you guys who have developed a model, process-based behavior therapy, that I don't know if I'm nuanced enough, but for what I know, not being a scientist at all, I look at it as if it is one of the most, maybe not the most effective model to work in the history of psychotherapy to treat psychological suffering. Is that not nuanced enough?
Well, process-based behavior therapy, or PBBT as we call it, it offers this integration between the basic science and the practice of psychotherapy. But it does that with a level of precision that allows the analysis to actually be applied to all clients. And that type of scientific integration between the science and the applied is actually very rare in clinical psychology, and in fact, some people question whether it's ever been done before, process-based behavior therapy. So I guess in a sense, it's groundbreaking in that it actually gives people that scientist practitioner model that, psychology has strived for a very long time with a specific level of precision as well.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me a bit of, I once had a supervisor, and maybe you can repeat it because I don't recall it clearly enough. She said there are like two types of psychotherapy. There is the, oh, that's why type of psychotherapy. And then there is the, and what can we do now type of psychotherapy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And most psychotherapies do that. And, for example, Freud was one of the ones that was very good at the why. And, other psychotherapies are amazing at the what and what we do about it. But what PBBT does is that it tries to do both, and it does both very, very well. We can explain why humans suffer, and we can also tell people a direction on what to do about that and to change it. So it really does have that seamless integration between the why and the what. So that's a lovely way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. You said, yeah, probably it is groundbreaking. And yeah. I thought, well, maybe Skinner would have said the same thing, or Freud would have said the same thing. So for people who don't know as much about this, can you elaborate a bit on that?
That's a great question. Skinner and Freud were, of course, groundbreaking in what they added to psychology. Skinner's analysis is still used today to treat, for example, children with developmental disabilities and children with autism. His program is still widely used. But in terms of a behavior therapy to treat, adult psychology and complex adult behavior, there has been very few programs or therapy programs that actually can do that integration piece that we talked about. So in a sense, it is groundbreaking that there hasn't been many behavior therapies that came before PBBT that did that. In terms of groundbreaking psychotherapies, we have Linehan's DBT, we have Steve Hayes' ACT, obviously, and we have Kohlenberg's FAP. So there's only really been three to four behavior therapies within that came from this tradition in the last 40 years. So in a sense, it's the fourth of its kind in a long while.
Mm-hmm. I sometimes have a conversation with people that say, "Well, I've been to a psychologist, but it doesn't work for me to go to a psychologist." And then I often say to them, like, you really should ask what people have studied before, and because going to a psychologist doesn't mean anything. Maybe it doesn't click with a person. Maybe the model they're using doesn't work for you. It's really something that I think we don't spend enough time at to explain to people where we're coming from and how we go about helping them treat the thing they're suffering in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I think as psychologists, it is up to us to gain that trust and, from people to trust in what we do. And like, for example, in PBBT, Yvonne and I, between us, has spent 30 years on it, and we've put our whole careers so far into developing it. So, we want to be able to get that message out there that, this is really, really, it can be very transformative if you trust the approach and trust the people who do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. When did you know, like, we're actually building a model that can be very transformative for people's lives? When did you know?
Yeah, it's a good question, because like I just said, we've, between us, we've spent about 30 years, but that was not just developing PBBT, it was also developing that scientific theory that sits under PBBT, and that's called relational frame theory, or RFT. So, we have always worked in both sides of that integration. We've worked on developing the basic science and on the therapy. So it really was very, it was very a journey, I would say, to the development of it. But I think there were 2 points at which, I kind of felt like this really can be life changing. And the first point was during my PhD, when we were actually working on the behavioural account of psychosis, because behavioural psychology has always been very, very silent on psychosis. And through my PhD, when we were looking at that, it marked this kind of significant transition in the development of the scientific and the applied work, because we realized that, RFT can really be used to understand the most complex forms of suffering. And I think that was a big turning point for us, was that complexity piece, that, there are no groups of individuals that cannot be treated in the same way that we treat all clients. And I think the second was when we were in Ghent during the developments of RFT, when, Yvonne and I, we really started to look at and develop the model further and further. And we started to fill any gaps that we thought were there with these developments in the science. So any gaps that were there before were really filled, and we felt like, we're ready now to fully develop this. So I think there were those 2 points for me anyway.
You're talking about Dr. Yvonne Barnes-Holmes.
Sorry, yes, Dr. Yvonne Barnes-Holmes. Yvonne is the co-developer of Process-Based Behaviour Therapy. We've worked together for the last 15 years. Yvonne was my mentor, and now we're still working together. So this journey has always been shared between the 2 of us.
How do you go home? Like, okay, so we've discovered something that over the next decades will change psychology, coaching, the way people help people in a tremendous way. How do you go home then?
I think, like anyone else, for us, the work the work for me, I live through it. This model is an experiential one, and it's not something that I do during the day and then I leave at the door and don't pick up at night. I really do live this model, and part of living that model is what helped me develop it. So it's not just something I can leave at the door. I very much live the way that I expect my clients to do. I think an experiential approach to any psychotherapy is so important, because I think it's quite unfair for us to expect clients to do things we've never done. And also because as therapists, it's a difficult job. We need to look after ourselves and our own well-being, and it's those two pieces that this model for us is so important, that therapists actually undergo their own experiential work. So for me, I'm constantly doing that. I just live and breathe this work, so both my personal and my career.
Yeah, I think I as I know you now for a while, I think that I can really confirm that is the case. Yeah. And so, I mean, we've never really talked about that, but how did it transform you to live this yourself and experience this yourself?
It was, again, like, it was this journey over the last 15 years of, getting to know behavioral science. And, I think when I first came in contact with Dr. Yvonne Barnes-Holmes and her husband, Professor Dermot Barnes-Holmes in Maynooth, I was really struck by this work means something. This work can explain things that I think psychology for me had never explained before. So I think it started way back then in my undergraduate degree, when I thought, gosh, this is really something. Mm-hmm. And then as I started working more closely with the work and through the research that I started conducting in my PhD, then I actually started to implement the things that I'd learned in acceptance and commitment therapy, as I'd learned it at the time, into my own life. Mm-hmm. So I would say over time, it's not that things changed dramatically at one point. Over time, I think, I gradually shaped myself into the person that I really believed I wanted to be, through that time. So yeah, it was a process, and it's ongoing. I believe growth doesn't stop. I think every day I strive to be the best I can be in the space that I have on that day. So that's just the way that I try to live my life.
Mm-hmm. So is it something that coming across PBBT, Process-Based Behaviour Therapy, do you think it, or has it transformed in a way your self-image? Let me rephrase that. For me, if I look at the work that I do, and I think in the amount that we've talked about it, it seems like human suffering has to do with self-image. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And, just to kind of back up a slight bit from self-image, just to kind of explain maybe from a PBBT perspective, why humans suffer. And it goes back to that behavioural science that we talked about, that for us, everything humans do, so thinking, feeling, behaving, remembering, everything they do is language. Okay. And the way we explain language and using our behavioral science is using RFT. And what RFT tells us is that the way that we think and we feel and we behave is through this process called relating. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and obviously PBBT is process-based. So it's based on this process of relating. So what that basically means is that humans can relate things together in endless ways, very arbitrary ways, and very complex ways. So our whole sense of who we are, how we see ourselves in the world, like our sense of self, or that self-image, like you mentioned, is comprised of these relations about who we are as a human being, how good or bad we are, our capabilities, how we compare ourselves to others. And, this sense of meaning about ourselves tends to give, our behavior, tends to guide our behavior and what we do. So this whole sense of self, let's say, and who we are tends to be at the core of what everything we do as human beings. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So for us, the kind of all forms of human suffering lies with how we actually relate to ourselves and the world around us. Yeah.
Yeah. So human suffering actually is our mind being able to connect experiences, what we have on a day-to-day basis with other people, with things that happen to us, are somehow related to how we see ourselves.
Exactly.
If we're capable of dealing with that situation, if what we think we deserve to happen to us, etc.
Exactly. And a lot of that relating is not necessarily in our conscious awareness, if you know, for want of a better word. It's not that we're, thinking it in a very, covert way. It's just that we've learned to do that very automatically and very easily, so that this is the way, if I believe I'm a person who is X, this is the way I behave in the world. So it becomes very automatic and very coherent for us, so that sometimes we don't even know we're thinking that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you mean with coherent?
As in, it makes sense to us. If I said to you, for example, Annick, do you think you're a good person? You say yes, that just feels true or feels right to you. It feels coherent. That's all it means. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of the decisions that we make, if this is not always conscious process that we're dealing with, then a lot of the decisions that we make in our lives are based on that without us knowing it.
Exactly. Some people who've done a lot of kind of self-awareness work, they will have a good understanding of that type of thinking that lies underneath. But for many people, and particularly people who are very, struggling with their mental health, those meanings are so far back that they just can't see them. So our job in PBBT is to try to, let's say, uncover those layers of meanings and, try to get to the core of what that meaning is for that person and how it's guiding their lives daily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and now maybe a question that is far too black and white and too simplified, but what does that mean? So that means that I have to work on my self-image and then I resolve everything that I have, that I'm suffering from in my life.
Well, like, for example, what we do, like I said, is when we're uncovering those meanings, there is what we would say functions attached to that meaning. So the functions just being all the behavior that we do, all the things we do with that meaning. So, part of what we do is, yes, we uncover that, but it's also to change our relationship with that meaning. So it's not necessarily to work on the image, it's to own it. Okay, so rather than, for example, my anxiety owning me, I can own my anxiety. So it's a place to be, it's a space from which you can operate on, which we call self as hierarchical. So self being bigger than and the owner of the experience. And we use lots of different techniques to do that. But, the key piece is that process of switching the ownership from the anxiety to the person. So that's the kind of key aim of PBBT.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to I get what you're saying, but I'm trying to, for the people who are listening and who don't have this scientific based background and who are like suffering from anxiety or depression or even insecurity, what they first need to learn to do is to realize that is their lstarting point. That is what I think I can bear, what I think I can, what I believe in for my future, etc., is what will determine how I will behave today in the smallest of things. And realizing that can help me get more agency over my life instead of the depression having agency over me.
Exactly. And it's whenever that depression or anxiety, whenever those intense feelings come up, it's about standing back for one moment and just asking yourself, what's this about right now? What way am I relating to myself in this moment? Is it that I feel like I'm not good enough, for example? And that usually makes me just want to spend the day, for example, in bed or not seeing people or whatever. So it's always, one hand is always speaking to the other in that, the meaning part and the behavior part, what's going on in that moment, and, what do I tend to do with that when that shows up? So it's only when you do the two things together, like you say, you get that agency, and for us, that ownership over that experience. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. It's a bit chauvinistic to say, but a part of this has been developed in Belgium, hasn't it?
It has indeed, yes. So 5 years ago, well, in 2015 now, actually, at this point, we got a large, Professor Dermot Holmes was awarded a large grant of 2.1 million to actually travel to Belgium with the research team and to continue this work. So in Ghent University. So it was actually just the grant was the only grant ever awarded, as far as we were aware, in Europe, to actually integrate the basic science and clinical application. So the grant was designed to actually do that. So we're so grateful to the FWO for awarding that research funding to us. Yes, absolutely.
So are all of us, this will be, this history has been written there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, notwithstanding the work that was done in Ireland before that, of course, but we wouldn't have had the space or the time or the creativity to do the work that we did in the 5 years while we were in Ghent University without that funding, because, with academic positions, you have to juggle teaching and lots of other things. So we really were just given the space to research, and also Yvonne and I to do a lot of the clinical development while we were in Ghent. So it really would never have happened without those 5 years in Ghent, without that funding. So we'll be forever grateful to the FWO for that.
What surprised me or what was remarkable for me when we're both, I think, a member of the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, and being part of that, I got to know a lot of scientists over various of domains, and something that in our conversations came up quite often was the hard way that scientists can talk about each other's work, and the way that this is like a culture or something that was really surprising to me, because to me it's like you're doing something that is fascinating and that can only cause curiosity of what are you doing, and what are the latest insights, etc. But that's what I found time and again having these conversations, how hard it can be to be a scientist and to discover something. Definitely, I guess, something as huge as you guys have done. So why is that?
I think, science and academia is extremely competitive, but, and I think one reason is because obtaining an academic position is very difficult. Okay. So unfortunately, I think the science and the race for an academic post sometimes becomes entangled. But I think generally in science, people can just become very protective over the work, and rightly so. People have put their whole careers into doing very, very good work. So I just think, many scientists want the really good work to be done and will work very hard to ensure that that quality remains in the work. Mm-hmm. So I think some of it comes from that too.
But if you've done this work for 15 years, were there times where you thought, oh, really, I'm done. I want to quit. I want to do something else? Or has it ever happened?
Yes, absolutely. Like I mentioned before, academia is very competitive. And I realized myself that if I wanted to get an academic post, I would have had to give up some aspects of my work that I really love doing, and also in my personal life, which I just wasn't prepared to do. So I was extremely, extremely lucky during my PhD and my postdoc in Ghent, because I was given a lot of space to be creative and do the work that I wanted to do. But unfortunately, with some academic positions, there's a lot of pressure put on the individual from the university and from other bodies, for example, grant bodies that control the work that you do, which kind of stifles the creativity. So they were parts of the work that I really wasn't prepared to do, because although I would have loved an academic position, but I would have loved an academic position to do the work that I really wanted to do. So, if we wanted to continue the work in PBBT, for example, it would have been very, very difficult to do that if I was kind of constrained by a university or a grant body, for example. So it wasn't, even though it's a lovely creative environment to work in, it wasn't going to facilitate the work that I really wanted to do. And indeed, I did leave the academy. So yes, I did inevitably have that decision to make. Sorry.
No, you go.
Yeah, it's just because I couldn't find that position. Yvonne and I made the decision to both leave the academy to continue this work, and then we decided to set up Perspectives in Ireland. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if just to find some clear examples for people who are listening, how for you did PBBT help you in your own research work in that kind of environment? How did you do that?
I think, for me, academia was never about, achieving in a sense that, I think it could for many people. I think it always gave me a perspective on what I really want for my own life. I very easily could have got caught up in the race and just gone, for the academic position at all costs. But for me, what PBBT did is that it said no more costs. I was able to choose that exact thing, that I wasn't willing to give up parts of my life or things that I really wanted in my life in the future, that I wasn't prepared to let those costs happen. So it helped me because it was able to give me a perspective on what I really want and who I really want to be, and what really, really makes me happy every day. So I think that inevitably I wouldn't have been able to make the decision to leave academia without that perspective, I think.
Yeah, we were talking about that yesterday. I was, amongst others, talking to Rikke Kjelgaard. You probably know her as a Swedish Danish trainer. And we were talking about always trying to see the perspective of what matters most to you.
Exactly.
Where your heart is at.
Exactly. And that can be defined whatever way it is for you. But once it matters to you, then, we would say go for it.
Mm-hmm. But it does demand like a kind of it's obviously it's what we tell people to find that, and at the same time, I think it's often easier said than done if you need to discriminate. Is this what I'm doing because it will make me feel better, or is this truly where my heart is at and where I really want to go in my life?
That's a great point. And, in PBBT, you rarely hear us talking about values for that exact reason, because for us, values, it's almost something that can feel like it's put on you and not something that's chosen for you. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I should be doing these things. Whereas for us, the values piece, if you want to call it that, is almost done at the very, very end, because for us, you can't really have values without a valuer. And for us, it's about building the valuer. That's the most important piece, because then, whatever behavior you're choosing, it's from the right place. It's not about anything else. So it's just where I really want to go with my life. And often if it's done for us at that later stage, when the sense of self is really, really solid, then the choices are a lot easier for the person to make, because it's a lot clearer. There's much less fog.
Yeah, so it's a process. It's not something that you can just decide or just feel or just know. You might be mistaken.
Absolutely, exactly. And I think if that piece for us, if that piece is done too early, often, the choices are coming from a place that maybe aren't, the most authentic for that individual. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because that word has, in all the interviews that I've done so far, is a word, two words come back quite every time in an interview is authenticity and kindness. Those are the two things that come back every time. And I guess authenticity is a sense of honesty, but finding that honesty, knowing honesty is, I mean, if you ask people, am I an honest person? Most people say, yes, of course I am. I don't like lying, but I mean, we can really seriously lie to ourselves about what we think is important in our lives.
Absolutely. And that is exactly the part of the PBBT model that we've built in, because that dishonesty, and it's not sense, we don't say that in the sense that people mean to do it. It's not that at all. It's just that we learn to kind of be dishonest with ourselves very, very readily in this world. And that sense of self-honesty is one of the biggest moves that we make with our clients, is that and it's a very brave move to be able to make, is to look honestly at the way that I think or I feel about myself. And I think that is just the core of our model, is that's that very first piece that we try to work through all those layers, getting to that bottom, that core piece where the client really honestly looks at themselves and moves from there. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so for me, I would say that is, we've talked about self-image, but for me, probably that is one big part of it, why people suffer, is because we are so easily telling ourselves stories about ourselves and about our environment that we cannot get out of stuff, and that we want this stuff, and or these people around us, or that choice that we made, it was a conscious choice and I really like the choice, and etc., etc. That seems to be something we so easily do, we do not even notice it. So how does that happen? Why do we do that?
That's a great question, and you've put the nail on the head there. There is this self-image piece. There's the way that we relate to ourselves, but then there's all the things we do with it. For example, if I think I'm not good enough, but I might, be Mother Teresa and just help other people all the time. I'll just focus on being a good mother. I'll just pretend, I am good enough by buying the best car, whatever it is, keep up with the Joneses, whatever. So it's all these extra things that we add to this to sort of almost pretend it's that dishonesty that you talk about, that that's not the case, or it's somehow not true. And all of that makes complete sense to do. Of course it does. It's just that adds all these extra layers of suffering on top of that. So that's exactly right. It's all those extra pieces that are added to that.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say, like if we then look at, for example, depression, how can we add this to someone who's depressed or anxious?
Just in the exact same way. For example, like for us, you never really hear us talking about categories, because for us it's the process underneath that matters. So for the process is always the same. It's that self piece that sits at the core. So imagine somebody who is anxious, for example, and that piece is, I'm fat, for example. Let's just say somebody who relates to themselves in that way, and that sits at the bottom. But their behavior, for example, might be, I don't eat, or I control what I eat. So it's all the behaviors that go on top of that. So just like that, it's all those layers of how I actually relate to myself and what I do with it. So then the controlling of the food actually becomes the problem, really, not really the fact that I think, I look a certain way. So you can see how it kind of builds in complexity, over time for a lot of people. Yeah, so we're always looking at those layers.
It reminds me a bit of a quote that I don't remember where I picked it up, but it was living. Oh yeah, I think it was Jason Luoma, who I heard say once, living well is more important than feeling good. And I mean, if we make choices that aren't really honest, but we're telling ourselves that are the best choices for us to make, it can feel good.
Yeah, exactly. It can, but you do get a sense from people who are pretending a lot that they're just exhausted doing it.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of space and often relief when people feel that, they can stop pretending. So even though it might feel good for a time, there is this sense of it just doesn't feel right, and that's the first piece of the honesty piece for us. It gives people that space to just kind of stand back and say, look, let's just, stop exhausting yourself trying to feel good all the time.
Yeah. I think if I look at my own life, then I can see how sometimes it can be very close to what it is that you do think is most important, but maybe what you're doing isn't the thing that you think is most important. We've talked about this, the fact that I sold my company in the beginning of 2020, where I did 3,000 psychologists, psychotherapists that I trained in ACT. And up until then, I said, this is the thing that I love the most. I absolutely love doing trainings. And the thing was that while saying it, I believed it. And at the same time, there was this kind of heaviness around it. And I continued it, and I mean, we've done the postgraduate that we developed, and it really felt like this is the most important thing and work that I'm doing here, and it's so exhilarating and it's so inspiring, and at the same time, I felt a heaviness. And so when we started talking about it, for me, it felt like, okay, yes, this is not the thing that I really, really like to do. And the funny part of it is, or the powerful thing about it is that what I'm doing today looks like that. I mean, I'm still teaching people in a way how to do things. But at the same time, if I am a teacher, I'm not happy. And I was invited to be a teacher a few weeks ago, and I could just feel how my body said, nah, don't fool yourself. You don't like this. And that was a very powerful moment to realize that, my whole system knew, nah, this is not you. Even if it looks like things that you want to do, but in the detail, it is not me.
Exactly. And look at the bravery in that honesty to just stand back and just say no, because, you can feel straight away that, if this just doesn't feel right, it's probably not from the right place, and over time you build up that skill of really looking at yourself very honestly. But it's just exactly that. It's giving yourself that permission to stand back and go, right, where does this sit with me? And giving yourself the permission to say no, because I just, it doesn't fit right with what I really want in my life. Yeah.
It was a very, very essential moment because it really questioned a lot of things that I was doing at the time. And I mean, I knew people were going to be shocked if I would sell the company and stop with it, because I said so many times, this is what I absolutely like to do. And I guess in a sense, it's the same when people say, but this is my partner and I really, really love him. And somewhere inside of you, something says, nah, that's not really true. But it's so difficult to look at it until you do and go through it. And then you can come to more a sense of self where you're at ease with yourself and you don't have to lie to yourself anymore and go do the things you really think matter most, I guess.
Exactly. And, like you said, there's such power in that feeling, that little sense that this is not right. We would often say to people, listen to your gut, because that means something. That's telling you that for a reason. Let's listen to that. The gut, it can be it's a really good signpost to this is not right for a reason.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you say that, because from a scientist, I wouldn't have guessed that this would be something that you would say, listen to your gut, but it is so important to do that.
Yeah, because that meaning that sits underneath it, whether you can touch it or not, it's telling you that for a reason. Sometimes the gut's so far away, we don't have anything telling us this is not what we really want. But, often people do. And I think it's so important to listen to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would that be like the advice that you would have for people who are listening at the moment and they don't feel well? Is there like anything that you would advise them to do?
It's difficult to give advice because, what we do is so functional, it's so individual. But,
It's a whole process.
Exactly. But, I would just ask people just to stand back and stop for a minute and just look down at themselves and just ask themselves what they're really feeling about themselves honestly. And being honest with yourself is the most powerful thing you can really do. So, if it's just about opening up a conversation with yourself, I think that's a step forward. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think if people are listening and they can just, I think that people who feel that they're not really honest with themselves, they'll probably know by listening to this, like in a vague sense, maybe, yeah, I know what this is about. I just don't feel like looking into it. I'm scared of it. But maybe that's the start, to just notice this conversation has triggered something. And maybe you just in the next few days want to go look for what is it that it triggered.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, sometimes we need to reach out and ask for help to do that. It's not easy to do by ourselves. But, even just thinking about it is something, because we can all, no matter where we're at in our lives, no matter what stage of training we're at, whether we're clients or psychologists, we can always ask ourselves that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Okay. Coming at the end of our conversation, I really, really want to take the time to thank you. To thank you for the work that you've done with the university. 30 years, along with both professors, Barnes Holmes. I think I can speak for many, many people when I say you will be changing the field of psychology. And thank you for being curious enough and thorough enough and to have done this work and never have ran away from it. And for us to have that information to help people live a full life. We have that information now. So thank you very much for that.
No, thank you so much for saying that, Annick, and thank you for supporting us in this work and for helping us within Belgium to get this work out there. So we really appreciate that.
I was thinking, because I'm going to forget it otherwise. You have established Perspectives Ireland, and so I guess that the work that you do is not academic anymore. So what is it that you do now?
Yeah, we have given up the research element of the work because we simply just wouldn't have time to do that and the work that we're doing at the moment. But we still have a team that's working on that work that we work closely with, but we're just not doing it ourselves. So what Yvonne and I are doing is we're really using this time to continue to develop PBBT. We have a book underway. We also are doing a lot of kind of consultancy work and training. We're training psychologists, obviously, in this model, and also training people within different sectors at all levels about this work, because the model can be applied to anything. So, we're helping organizations and schools, for example, hospitals in different sectors to help train them in things that PBBT can help them with.
So that means corporate organizations, for example, can also find information on the website, on your website, on what you're doing for them.
Yes, absolutely. You know, a lot of the work that we do, we can do individual consultancy, but a lot of the work that we do is kind of group-based work. But with the pandemic as well, we also are doing kind of these self-paced online work pieces that employees can do at home in their own time. So yeah, all that information is on the website, and if people want to contact us, because we do tailor everything to individual needs, because like I said, this is so individual in the work that we do. So yeah, all of that information is there.